I'm Martha, 38 female. For 15 years, I lived a life that many would envy, residing in a beautiful home in a wealthy suburb with my husband, David, and our wonderful daughter, Sophie. I worked as a forensic accountant, a job I loved for its precision and its demand for finding truth in numbers. But the biggest numbers I was dealing with were about to be the ones my husband was trying to make disappear, along with my future. This is the story of how my powerful father-in-law, a senior law partner, conspired with my husband to leave me with nothing in our divorce, and how a secret whispered by my 8-year-old daughter gave me the one key I needed to unravel their entire scheme. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Life with David Miller was like living inside a snow globe. From the outside, it was picturesque, perfect, and sealed off from the harsh realities of the world. He was a successful real estate developer, a man who could point to half the new luxury condos downtown and say, "I built that." Our home was a sprawling colonial with manicured lawns and a 3-car garage, a testament to his success. I had my own career as a forensic accountant, a field I excelled in, but I'd scaled back to part-time after Sophie was born, a decision David had enthusiastically supported. "Family comes first," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder, a gesture that I once found comforting but now realize was controlling. Our social life was a calendar of charity galas, dinner parties with David's business partners, and weekend trips to the country club. I played the part of the supportive wife well. I wore the right dresses, laughed at the right jokes, and made sure our home was always ready to host influential people. At the center of this world was David's father, Richard Miller. He was a force of nature, a senior partner at one of the city's most powerful law firms. Richard was a man who commanded respect with a mere glance. He oozed authority, and his approval was the sun around which David, and by extension, our family, orbited. Richard had never been particularly warm to me. He saw me not as a daughter-in-law, but as an accessory to his son's image, a well-educated, presentable woman who completed the portrait of success. He often made condescending remarks about my job, calling it a cute little numbers hobby. He'd pat me on the head, literally, and say, "Good that you keep your mind busy, Martha." I gritted my teeth and smiled, all for the sake of family harmony. For years, I told myself this was just how families like the Millers operated. They were built on power, legacy, and appearances. Love and warmth were commodities, not fundamentals. David, for his part, was a master of the grand gesture. Lavish anniversary trips, expensive jewelry for my birthday, a brand new SUV when my old one had a minor issue. These were his ways of showing affection, and for a long time I mistook them for love. It was easier than admitting the truth. The gifts were payments for my compliance. They kept the cage gilded, distracting me from the fact that the door had long been locked. I managed our household finances, or so I thought. David gave me a generous allowance transferred into a joint account every month, which covered everything from groceries to Sophie's private school tuition. He handled all the major investments and his business finances himself. "Don't you worry your pretty head about it," he'd say, a line straight from his father's playbook. "I've got it all handled. Richard helps me with the important stuff." This arrangement, which once felt like a luxury, slowly began to feel like a muzzle. As a forensic accountant, I was trained to see patterns, to notice when the numbers didn't add up. But in my own life, I had been willfully blind. The emotional distance between David and me had grown into a chasm. Our conversations became transactional, revolving around schedules, social obligations, and Sophie. The intimacy was gone, replaced by a polite, hollow routine. I felt more like a household manager than a wife. I tried to talk to him about it once, suggesting we go to counseling. He laughed it off. "Counseling? Martha, we have a perfect life. What's there to talk about? Don't create problems where there aren't any." His dismissal was so absolute that it silenced me. I retreated, pouring my love and energy into Sophie, who was the one pure, uncomplicated joy in my life. She was a bright, curious child, a perfect mix of my inquisitiveness and David's charm. The moments I spent with her, reading bedtime stories, helping with her art projects, listening to her endless, imaginative tales were the only times I felt truly myself. They were the moments that made the gilded cage bearable. The illusion of our perfect life was maintained by a constant, low-level hum of anxiety that I learned to ignore. It was the way David's phone would go silent the moment I walked into a room. It was the vague explanations for late nights at the office or sudden weekend business trips. It was the way he and his father would stop talking and share a knowing look whenever I joined their conversation in the study. I saw these red flags, but I explained them away. He's under pressure at work. His father is his closest advisor. I'm being paranoid. I chose to believe the story I was being told, the one about the happy, successful family, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. I had built my entire adult life on the foundation of my marriage to David. My career was secondary, my social circle was intertwined with his, and my financial security was, I believed, completely dependent on him. The cage was comfortable, and the thought of leaving it meant facing a world I was no longer sure I could navigate alone. Looking back, I see how carefully I was managed, how my independence was systematically eroded under the guise of love and protection. Every decision that pushed me further away from my own career and financial autonomy was framed as a gift, a way to make my life easier. And I accepted it all because I wanted to believe in the fairy tale. But the foundations of that gilded cage were beginning to rust, and the first crack was about to appear, threatening to bring the entire beautiful, false structure crashing down around me. The first significant crack in our marriage appeared not with a bang, but with a quiet, icy remark. It was our 15th wedding anniversary. David had planned a surprise dinner at the most exclusive restaurant in the city. He presented me with a stunning diamond necklace, and I played my part, expressing breathless gratitude. But later that evening, as we sat in a strained silence, I tried to bridge the emotional gap between us. "David," I began softly, "do you remember our first anniversary? We had pizza on the floor of our tiny apartment because we couldn't afford a table. We talked for hours." He looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Martha, what's the point of reminiscing about being poor? We're here now. Isn't this better?" His words hit me like a splash of cold water. He didn't just dismiss the memory, he seemed to resent it. It was a clear sign that the man I had married was gone, replaced by someone who measured happiness in dollars and square footage. After that night, I started paying closer attention. The late nights became more frequent, the business trips longer. His explanations grew thinner. A conference in Miami turned out to be, through a quick search of the conference's official website, a fabrication. When I confronted him, he turned it around on me, accusing me of being suspicious and untrusting. "My work is complicated, Martha. I can't have you interrogating me like one of your clients." He stormed out, leaving me standing in our marble-floored foyer, feeling small and foolish. The argument was a masterclass in gaslighting, a tactic he and his father had perfected. They made you question your own sanity for daring to question their actions. The real turning point came a few weeks later. I was looking for a document in his home office, a place I rarely entered. David was meticulous, almost pathologically so, about his privacy. But he'd called and asked me to find a specific contract and email it to him. As I searched his desk drawer, my hand brushed against a small, leather-bound notebook tucked away beneath a stack of files. It wasn't a business ledger, it was a personal journal. Curiosity got the better of me. I knew it was a violation of his privacy, but my own sense of reality was already so warped that I felt I needed something tangible. I opened it. My heart sank as I read. It wasn't a diary of his thoughts and feelings, but a cold, calculated log of expenses. Dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, jewelry from boutiques I'd never visited, hotel stays in our own city, and next to many of the entries, a single initial. It didn't take a forensic accountant to figure out what was happening. David was having an affair. The precision of his record-keeping was what struck me the most. It was so dispassionate, so methodical. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a business expense, another part of his life he was managing. I felt a wave of nausea. The gilded cage I had been living in suddenly felt like a prison cell. That night, I confronted him. I didn't scream or cry. My voice was eerily calm as I placed the open notebook on the kitchen island in front of him. He looked at it, then at me, and his expression wasn't one of guilt or remorse. It was one of annoyance, as if I had discovered a minor accounting error. "You went through my personal things," he said, his tone accusatory. "David," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Who is, he sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "It's not what you think." But his denial was weak, perfunctory. He knew he was caught. What followed wasn't an apology, but a justification. He spoke of the pressures of his work, of feeling misunderstood, of us having grown apart. He never once took full responsibility. Instead, he painted himself as a victim of circumstance. "It just happened," he said. "It doesn't mean anything." But the notebook in front of us, with its months of meticulously logged entries, told a very different story. It meant everything. It meant our marriage was a lie. I told him I wanted a divorce. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and final. For the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. Not sadness, but strategic concern. His mask of indifference slipped, revealing the cold, calculating man underneath. "Let's not be hasty, Martha," he said, his voice suddenly smooth and persuasive. "Think about Sophie, think about our life, we can work through this." But I knew working through this meant me quietly accepting his infidelity while he continued to live his double life. It meant me staying in my cage. "No, David," I said, my voice firm. "It's over." The next day, he moved out. He told Sophie that he and Mommy needed some space, but that they both loved her very much. And then, the true battle began. The moment I hired a lawyer, David's entire demeanor changed. The pretense of reconciliation vanished, replaced by open hostility. And standing right behind him, directing the entire show, was his father, Richard. Richard called me the day after I filed the papers. His voice was devoid of any warmth. "Martha, you are making a grave mistake," he said, the words a clear threat. "You are part of this family. If you try to tear it down, you will find yourself with nothing. David is a good man, and he will be provided for. You, on the other hand, are on your own." I soon found out what he meant. When my lawyer, Evelyn Reed, requested David's financial disclosures, the documents we received were a work of fiction. They painted a picture of a man on the brink of financial collapse. His development company was supposedly drowning in debt. His investments had all mysteriously soured. The man who had just bought me a diamond necklace was now claiming to be nearly bankrupt. As a forensic accountant, I knew I was looking at a sham. The numbers were too neat, the losses too perfectly timed, but proving it was another matter. They had hidden everything masterfully. Every asset seemed to be encumbered, every income stream diverted. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, trusts in other people's names. It was a complex web of deceit, and I knew Richard's legal genius was behind every thread. I was facing financial ruin. The joint accounts were frozen. The credit cards were canceled. I was left in a multi-million-dollar house with no access to cash. They were trying to starve me out, to force me into accepting a paltry settlement that would leave me and Sophie with virtually nothing. The man I had spent 15 years with was not just leaving me, he was trying to destroy me. And his father, the powerful patriarch, was handing him the tools to do it. The weeks that followed were a grueling battle for survival. David and Richard had launched a full-scale financial assault, and I was losing. My lawyer, Evelyn Reed, was brilliant and tenacious, but she was fighting against a fortress of legal tricks and financial mazes built by Richard's decades of experience. We filed motions to compel, demanding more transparent financial records, but Richard's legal team was always one step ahead, burying us in mountains of irrelevant paperwork and filing endless delays. They were bleeding me dry, both emotionally and financially. My savings were dwindling, spent on legal fees just to keep the fight going. I had to sell the jewelry David had given me over the years, the so-called symbols of his love, just to pay the mortgage on the house they were trying to take from me. The stress was immense. I couldn't sleep, I barely ate. The only thing that kept me going was Sophie. For her, I had to be strong. I plastered a brave face on every morning, making her breakfast, helping with her homework, and pretending that our world wasn't crumbling. She knew Mommy and Daddy weren't living together anymore, and it was hard on her. David would pick her up for his scheduled visitations, always arriving in a flashy new rental car. A subtle taunt, I was sure, and bringing her back with expensive new toys. He was trying to buy her affection while simultaneously claiming poverty in court. Sophie was a quiet, observant child. She didn't talk much about the divorce, but I could see the confusion and sadness in her eyes. I tried to shield her from the ugliness of it all, but kids see more than we give them credit for. She saw the strain on my face, she heard my hushed, anxious phone calls with Evelyn. She knew something was wrong. One Ev. Enning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by a mountain of bank statements and legal documents, my head in my hands. I felt utterly defeated. We had a court hearing in 2 weeks, and Evelyn had warned me that without a smoking gun, a piece of concrete evidence of hidden assets, the judge would likely rule based on the fraudulent documents David had submitted. I was looking at losing the house and getting a minimal alimony settlement that wouldn't even cover our basic expenses for a year. Sophie came in, her favorite teddy bear tucked under her arm. She put her small hand on my shoulder. "Are you sad, Mommy?" she asked, her voice soft. I forced a smile and wiped a tear from my eye before she could see it. "Just a little tired, sweetie. Grown-up stuff." She looked at the papers on the table, her brow furrowed with a seriousness that was far beyond her 8 years. "Is it about Daddy's money?" I hesitated, then nodded. I didn't want to burden her, but I was too exhausted to lie. "Yes, honey, it is." She was quiet for a moment, then she said something that would change everything. "Daddy has lots of secret money," she said, matter-of-factly. I looked at her, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean, sweetie? How do you know that?" "He told me," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "When I was with him last weekend, we went to a big, shiny building downtown. He said it was his special bank, not the one we go to with you." My mind started racing. David had disclosed 3 bank accounts, all with modest balances. A special bank was not on that list. "What else did he tell you, Sophie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, not wanting to scare her. "He had a special key," she continued, her eyes wide with the importance of the secret. "It's not a regular key. It's small and silver and has a number on it. He said it was for his rainy day box where he keeps his treasures. He said it was a big secret, just between him and me and Grandpa Richard. A rainy day box, a treasure box, a safe deposit box." The pieces clicked into place in my mind with the cold, hard certainty of a deadbolt locking. David had a secret safe deposit box at an undisclosed bank, a place where he could be stashing cash, bearer bonds, jewelry, or deeds to properties, all untraceable assets. And he had been careless enough, arrogant enough to tell our daughter about it, framing it as a fun little secret. "Sophie," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Did you see the key? Do you know where he keeps it?" She nodded eagerly. "Uh-huh. He keeps it in his office at his new apartment. In the big wooden box on his desk where he puts his special pens. He showed me. He said I should never, ever tell anyone, especially you." My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the smoking gun. It was a long shot based on the words of an 8-year-old, but it was the first real lead we'd had in months. But how could I prove it? I couldn't exactly break into his apartment. David was cunning. The box could be gone by now. He might have been testing her. But then Sophie added one more detail, a detail so crucial it felt like a gift from the universe. "Grandpa Richard was on the phone with him right after," she said. "Daddy put it on speaker. Grandpa said, 'The key to the Sterling Reserve box is secure, right? We can't have any loose ends.' Daddy said, 'Of course, Dad, it's safe. Martha will never find it.' Sterling Reserve. It wasn't the name of a bank I recognized, which was probably the point. It was likely a private vault company or a boutique bank that catered to the wealthy, the kind of place that valued discretion above all else. And my daughter had just handed me its name. I hugged Sophie tightly, burying my face in her hair to hide the tears that were now streaming down my face. These weren't tears of sadness, but of hope. "Thank you, my sweet girl," I whispered. "You are so smart and so brave. You've helped Mommy more than you can ever imagine." She didn't understand the full weight of what she had done, but she knew she had made me feel better. She hugged me back, content. That night, for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of the old fire inside me. I was no longer just a victim. I was a forensic accountant with a lead. The game had changed. David and Richard thought they had me cornered, but they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated their own daughter, and in doing so, had underestimated me. The morning after Sophie's revelation, I called Evelyn with a renewed sense of purpose. My voice was steady and clear as I recounted the conversation, making sure to include every detail, especially the name, Sterling Reserve, and Sophie's description of the key. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Evelyn spoke. "Martha," she said, her tone a mix of caution and excitement, "this is exactly the kind of break we've been praying for, but we have to proceed with extreme caution. A child's testimony, especially about something she was told in confidence, can be difficult to use directly in court. David's lawyer will tear her apart and accuse you of coaching her. We can't put Sophie through that." "I would never do that to her," I said immediately. "So, what's our move? We know the box exists." "Our move is to use this information not as direct evidence, but as a map," Evelyn explained. "We need to find a way to legally compel David to admit the box's existence. I can file a subpoena duces tecum with every financial institution and private vault facility in a 100-mile radius with Sterling in its name. It's a fishing expedition, and Richard will fight it tooth and nail, but the specificity of the name gives us a fighting chance." While Evelyn began the legal legwork, I started my own investigation. As a forensic accountant, I had skills that went beyond just reading a balance sheet. I knew how to find patterns in chaos. I spent the next 48 hours glued to my computer, diving into a deep search for Sterling Reserve. It wasn't a bank. It was a high-end, private vault facility, one of those ultra-discreet places that offered anonymous safe deposit boxes for a hefty price. Their website was a masterpiece of vague luxury, promising unparalleled security and absolute confidentiality. They had one location in our city in a nondescript office building downtown, a big, shiny building, just as Sophie had described. The next step was connecting David to it. I started digging into David's corporate filings, the ones his lawyers had provided. They were a mess of interconnected LLCs and shell companies designed to obscure ownership. But they had made a mistake. In the metadata of one of the PDF documents, a hastily prepared statement of corporate debt, I found a digital trace. A username, R. Miller, Richard Miller. And the creation date of the document was just 2 days after I had filed for divorce. He was personally sanitizing the files. But that wasn't the discovery that mattered. Buried deep within the endless pages of one of his company's expense reports, filed under miscellaneous consulting fees, was a recurring annual payment of $5,000 to a company called SR Holdings, Inc. It was a generic name, designed to be overlooked. A quick search of state business records revealed that SR Holdings, Inc. was the registered parent company of the Sterling Reserve Private Vault. They had hidden the payments in plain sight, confident that no one would ever make the connection. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had found it. A direct financial link between David's company and the vault. It was the thread I needed to pull to unravel their whole story. I sent my findings to Evelyn, who was ecstatic. "Martha, this is brilliant," she said. "This is more than a fishing expedition now. This gives us probable cause. I'm filing an emergency motion to compel, specifically naming Sterling Reserve. With this payment record, the judge will have a hard time denying it. Richard will have to explain what a consulting fee to a safe deposit box company is for." The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. David and his father sat at the opposing table, looking smug and confident. Richard shot me a look of pure contempt, a silent message that I was a fool for continuing this fight. When Evelyn presented our motion, Richard's lawyer stood up and delivered a passionate speech about harassment and baseless accusations. He called our request a desperate, unfounded witch hunt and accused me of trying to destroy Mr. Miller's reputation out of spite. Richard watched the performance, a small, self-satisfied smile on his face. He thought he was going to win. He thought he had outsmarted me. Then, Evelyn presented her evidence. She started with the expense report, highlighting the $5,000 annual payment to SR Holdings, Inc. David's lawyer waved it off as a standard business expense. But then Evelyn presented the business registration, showing SR Holdings, Inc. as the owner of Sterling Reserve. The courtroom was silent. Richard's smile faltered. She then laid out the timeline, showing the payments had started 3 years prior, just as David's real estate business began to truly take off, and had continued like clockwork. The judge, a stern woman who did not suffer fools, looked over her glasses at David. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice sharp, "what is the nature of the consulting services provided by this SR Holdings, Inc.?" David stammered, looking to his father for help. Richard whispered something to his lawyer, who then stood up. "Your Honor, my client uses a variety of consulting services for his complex business dealings. It is an ordinary and necessary expense." The judge was not impressed. "That is not an answer, counselor. I am asking your client under oath to explain what this specific $5,000 annual payment is for." David squirmed in his seat. He was caught in a lie, and the penalty for perjury was far more severe than admitting to a hidden asset. After a long, agonizing silence, he finally mumbled, "It's for the rental of a secure storage unit." The judge's eyes narrowed. "And is there anything stored in this unit?" David's lawyer quickly interjected. "Your Honor, the contents of the box are private and not relevant to these proceedings." "I will be the judge of what is relevant," the judge snapped back. She turned to Evelyn. "Ms. Reed, your motion is granted. I am signing an order for the immediate inventory of safe deposit box number 713 at the Sterling Reserve Facility, to be conducted by a court-appointed third-party auditor in the presence of both parties' legal counsel. We will reconvene in 48 hours to review the findings." Richard's face went pale. The look of smug superiority was replaced by one of pure, unadulterated fury. He glared at me, his eyes promising retribution, but I wasn't scared anymore. I met his gaze, my expression calm and steady. I had him. I had them both. The truth was in that box, and in 48 hours it would finally be brought into the light. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a sense of relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees. The long, desperate fight was finally turning in my favor, all thanks to a little girl's whispered secret and a mother's refusal to be broken. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. The court order was a massive victory, but it wasn't the end of the game. I knew Richard and David wouldn't just give up. They would be scrambling, trying to find a loophole, a delay, any legal maneuver to stop the inventory of that box. Evelyn warned me to be prepared for anything. "Richard Miller didn't get to where he is by playing fair," she said over the phone. "He's like a cornered snake. He'll be at his most dangerous right before we have him." Her words were sobering, but I was resolved. I had come too far to back down now. The court-appointed auditor, a meticulous and impartial accountant named Mr. Gable, was scheduled to open the box at 10 a.m. on Friday. Evelyn and I would be there, and Richard would be there representing David. David himself, in a move that I found both cowardly and calculated, would be absent, claiming a last-minute, unavoidable business meeting. He couldn't face the music. I spent the time preparing myself mentally. I focused on Sophie, reminding myself why I was doing this. It wasn't just about the money. It was about securing a future for my daughter, a future free from the toxic influence and manipulative control of the Miller family. It was about showing her that her mother was a fighter, someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. The night before the inventory, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. "Martha." It was Richard's voice, cold and sharp. "We need to talk." I was stunned. "There's nothing to talk about, Richard. We'll let the courts handle it." "Don't be a fool," he hissed. "You have no idea what you're messing with. You think you've won? This is a minor setback. I am offering you a final chance to walk away with a reasonable settlement. Sign the papers, and you can have the house and a respectable alimony. Pursue this foolish crusade, and I will personally see to it that you are buried in legal battles for the next decade. You will work the rest of your life just to pay your lawyers. Is that what you want for yourself? For Sophie?" It was a threat, plain and simple, delivered with the chilling confidence of a man who was used to getting his way. For a brief moment, a sliver of fear crept in. He was powerful. He could make my life a living hell. But then I thought of Sophie's innocent face, of the secret she had trusted me with. I thought of the years of condescension, of being treated like a decorative object. My fear was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "My answer is no, Richard," I said, my voice steady. "I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up before he could respond. The line had been drawn. The chessboard was set, and all the pieces were in place for the final move. The next morning, I met Evelyn at the discreet downtown office building that housed Sterling Reserve. The lobby was all polished marble and brushed steel, designed to look more like a corporate headquarters than a vault. We were escorted to a private viewing room, a small, sterile space with a single steel table. A few minutes later, Richard arrived. He didn't look at me, his face a mask of controlled rage. He gave Evelyn a curt nod and sat down, placing his briefcase on the table with a sharp click. Finally, Mr. Gable, the auditor, entered, accompanied by a facility manager. He carried a sealed case containing the tools to open the box. The manager used his key, Mr. Gable inserted another, and with a soft whirring sound, the heavy metal door to the vault SW hung open. Mr. Gable retrieved a long, slim metal box, number 713, and placed it on the table in front of us. The room was utterly silent. My heart was pounding in my chest. This was the moment of truth. Mr. Gable used a final key to open the box itself. He lifted the lid. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, he began to methodically remove the contents, announcing each item in a dry, neutral voice as he logged it on his official form. Item 1, 150 bearer bonds, each with a face value of $10,000. A gasp escaped my lips. That was $1.5 million, untraceable and liquid. Richard's face was ashen. Item 2, 4 gold bars, 1 kilogram each. Evelyn did a quick calculation on her phone, her eyes wide. That was another $250,000 at least. Item 3, a velvet pouch containing assorted loose diamonds and precious gems. Mr. Gable carefully emptied the pouch. Dozens of sparkling stones glittered under the harsh fluorescent lights. Their value was impossible to guess on sight, but it was clearly substantial. Item 4, a stack of property deeds. He read out the addresses. There were 3, a beachfront condo in Florida, a ski cabin in Colorado, a small apartment in Paris. None of them had ever been mentioned. They were all held by an anonymous LLC registered in Delaware, the paperwork for which was neatly tucked in with the deeds. David hadn't just been hiding money, he had been building a secret, parallel life. The final items were in a large manila envelope. Mr. Gable opened it and pulled out stacks of cash. Item 5, packets of U.S. currency, $100 bills, totaling $500,000. The total value of the contents in the box was staggering. It was easily over $3 million, probably more, depending on the value of the gems and properties. This was the money David claimed he didn't have. This was the wealth his father had helped him squirrel away while I was selling my jewelry to pay my bills. I looked at Richard. The mask had finally shattered. He looked old, defeated, and utterly exposed. He knew, in that moment, that the game was over. He had leveraged all his power, all his intellect, and all his arrogance against me, and he had lost. The truth, delivered by an 8-year-old and uncovered by the woman he had dismissed as a hobbyist, had brought his carefully constructed fortress crashing down. Evelyn calmly collected our copy of the auditor's inventory list. "I think," she said, her voice dripping with professional satisfaction, "that we will have a much more productive settlement discussion now." Richard didn't reply. He simply stood up, his movements stiff, and walked out of the room without another word. I felt a profound sense of vindication, but it wasn't triumphant. It was a quiet, solemn victory. The contents of that box weren't just assets, they were proof of the depth of the betrayal, the cold, calculated cruelty of the 2 men I had once called family. Now, armed with the undeniable truth, it was time for the final confrontation. It was time for Judgment Day. The court hearing was scheduled 2 days after the inventory of the safe deposit box. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. The smug confidence of David and Richard was gone, replaced by a heavy, palpable sense of dread. David was present this time, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't look at me. Richard sat beside him, looking aged and weary, his expensive suit doing little to hide his defeat. News of the emergency hearing and the subsequent inventory had spread like wildfire through the legal community. Richard Miller, the untouchable titan of corporate law, had been caught red-handed committing fraud to help his son in a divorce case. His reputation was in tatters. Evelyn and I sat at our table, calm and prepared. We didn't have to be aggressive. The facts spoke for themselves. The auditor's official report was submitted as evidence. It was a stunning, undeniable document that laid out the extent of David's perjury and Richard's complicity. The judge read the report, her expression growing sterner with each page. When she finally looked up, her gaze was fixed on David. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice dangerously quiet. "In your sworn financial declarations to this court, you claimed a net worth of less than $200,000 and significant business debts. This report, however, details a collection of hidden assets valued at over $3 million. Would you care to explain this discrepancy?" David opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked to his father, but Richard could offer no help now. He was implicated as well. David's lawyer, a man who now looked deeply uncomfortable to be representing him, stood up. "Your Honor, my client, there has been a misunderstanding regarding the classification of these assets. They are part of a complex family trust." The judge cut him off sharply. "Save it." "Counselor, I have read the documents for this supposed trust. It's a transparently fraudulent vehicle for hiding marital assets, and it appears to have been drafted by your client's father, a senior member of the bar. This court is not amused." She then turned her attention to Richard. "Mr. Miller, as an officer of the court, you are held to a higher standard. Did you advise your son to conceal these assets and lie on a sworn legal document?" Richard stood slowly. His voice, when he spoke, was a hoarse whisper. "Your Honor, I was merely providing my son with financial advice in a private capacity." "Advice to commit perjury and fraud?" the judge retorted. "Your private advice has led to a flagrant abuse of the justice system you swore to uphold." The judge's condemnation was scathing. She made it clear that she was considering not only sanctions against David for perjury, but also reporting Richard to the State Bar Association for ethical violations, an action that would almost certainly lead to his disbarment and the end of his career. The fight was gone from them. Their entire strategy had been built on a foundation of lies, and now that foundation had been demolished. The judge called for a brief recess to allow the two parties to discuss a final settlement, with the clear implication that if David didn't offer something more than fair, she would make her own ruling, and it would be far more punitive. Evelyn, David's lawyer, and I went into a conference room. Richard was not invited to join. For the first time, I was negotiating from a position of absolute power. David's lawyer immediately put a new offer on the table. It was a complete capitulation. I would receive 70% of all disclosed and undisclosed marital assets, including the contents of the safe deposit box. I would get the house, free and clear. David would be responsible for all my legal fees. He would also be required to fund a trust for Sophie's education and future, administered solely by me. Finally, the alimony payments would be substantial, ensuring that Sophie and I could maintain our standard of living. Evelyn reviewed the terms. "It's more than we would have gotten even in a favorable ruling," she whispered to me. "They're terrified. They just want this to go away before the judge throws the book at them." I looked at the document. It represented everything I had fought for: security, justice, a future for my daughter. But there was one more thing I needed. "There's one more condition," I said, my voice clear and firm. David's lawyer looked at me surprised. "What is it?" "I want a written apology from David," I said. "In it, he will admit to hiding assets and lying to me and to the court. And I want a separate apology from Richard, admitting that he knowingly facilitated this fraud." The lawyer started to protest. "That's highly unusual. It's non-negotiable," I cut him off. "They tried to ruin me. They tried to leave me with nothing and paint me as a liar. I want their admissions in writing." He went back to confer with David and Richard. 10 minutes later, he returned looking grim. "They agree," he said, handing me 2 handwritten notes. I read them. They were short, clipped, and devoid of any real remorse, but they were admissions of guilt. That was enough for me. We went back into the courtroom and presented the signed settlement agreement to the judge. She reviewed it and nodded in approval. "This seems to be a fair and equitable resolution, given the circumstances," she said. She finalized the divorce, reading the terms of the settlement into the official record. It was over. As we were leaving the courtroom, David approached me. It was the first time he had spoken to me directly in months. "Martha," he said, his voice weak. I'm sorry." I looked at him, the man I had loved and built a life with. I felt no anger, no hatred. All I felt was a profound sense of pity. He was a weak man, a puppet for his domineering father, so consumed by greed that he was willing to destroy his own family for it. "I know, David," I said quietly, and I turned and walked away without looking back. My judgment day hadn't just been about legal victory, it was about my own personal liberation. I had faced the two most powerful and manipulative men in my life, and I had won, not by stooping to their level, but by relentlessly pursuing the truth. In the months following the divorce, my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined. The settlement provided more than just financial security, it gave me freedom. The first thing I did was sell the big house. It was beautiful, but it was a monument to a life that was a lie. It was Richard and David's symbol of success, not mine. I bought a smaller, charming house in a quiet, friendly neighborhood with a big backyard for Sophie to play in. It was a home we chose together, a place filled with light and laughter, not heavy with unspoken tensions and secrets. I went back to work full-time at my forensic accounting firm. My boss, who had been incredibly supportive throughout my ordeal, promoted me to partner. My personal experience had given me a new perspective on my work. I found a new passion in helping people, particularly women, who were being financially manipulated or defrauded. My story, once a source of pain and shame, became a source of strength and empathy. I understood the subtle ways powerful people could use money and legal jargon to intimidate and control others, and I was uniquely equipped to help fight back. Sophie blossomed in our new environment. Freed from the oppressive atmosphere of our old life, she became more outgoing and joyful. She loved our new home, our new school, and the fact that her mommy was happy and present. The expensive toys from her father sat largely untouched in her closet. She was more interested in building forts in the backyard and having friends over for sleepovers. David, as part of our custody agreement, saw her every other weekend. Their relationship was strained at first, but over time they found a new, more honest rhythm. Without his father's influence poisoning everything, David was forced to be a father on his own terms. He was still flawed, but he was trying, and for Sophie's sake, I supported that. The fallout for the Miller family was significant. Richard was, as the judge had threatened, reported to the state bar. After a lengthy investigation, he was suspended from practicing law for 2 years. For a man whose entire identity was built on his career and reputation, it was a devastating blow. He was forced into early retirement, a disgraced legend. His firm quietly removed his name from their letterhead. He and I never spoke again. David's business also suffered. News of the divorce and his fraudulent behavior made him a pariah in the business community. Partners pulled out of deals, and banks called in loans. He had to sell off several properties and significantly downsize his company. He was no longer the untouchable real estate mogul. He was just a man who had been humbled by his own greed. About a year after the divorce was finalized, I was attending a charity event, one I chose to be at, not one I was required to attend. A man introduced himself to me. He was a kind, intelligent architect with a warm smile. We started talking, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of connection that was genuine and uncomplicated. We started dating. It was slow, cautious at first, but it was real. He loved me for my mind and my strength, not for the image I projected. He admired my resilience and celebrated my independence. He wasn't trying to put me in a cage, gilded or otherwise. He was happy to see me fly. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Sophie and I were planting a garden in our backyard. Our hands were covered in dirt, and we were laughing as we argued over where to put the sunflowers. In that simple, perfect moment, I was struck by how far I had come. I had been brought to the brink of ruin, systematically stripped of my confidence and my security. I had been made to feel powerless and small by men who believed their power and wealth made them invincible. But they were wrong. I found my strength not in money or status, but in my own integrity, my love for my daughter, and my unwavering belief in the truth. The key that unlocked my future wasn't the small, silver one that led to a box of hidden treasures. It was the courage to listen to a child's whisper, to trust my own instincts, and to fight for the life that Sophie and I deserved. I had reclaimed my future, not by seeking revenge, but by seeking justice. And in doing so, I had built a new foundation, one made not of marble and lies, but of truth, resilience, and unconditional love. My name is Martha Peterson, and I am finally free.